Okay. Well, hello, everybody. It's fun to follow after the senator. He is definitely someone who has grappled with these issues at the local level. It's going to be interesting to see how and if he's able to get legislation through this Congress to do any of the things he's talking about, as always. My name's Alex Howard. I'm a senior editor for Technology and Society at the Huffington Post. These issues definitely resonate with me as one of the 21% of Americans who's constantly connected to the internet, and also sees the inequities that persist within the communities that I have grown up in, upstate New York, in Philadelphia, in Boston, and certainly other places around the world too, which are all really struggling with these issues. And the people up here studied these issues, or worked on these issues, have lots of things to say, so I'm going to give the stage to them as much as possible, offer them some questions, see if I can do the introductions right. Michael Mattmiller, he's Chief Technology Officer for the City of Seattle. That would be Seattle CTO for those of you who are tweeting. Andy Huckabee, right next to me, council member for the City of Lenexa. And let's see, National League of Cities Information Technology Communications Steering Committee. Dr. Nicole Turner-Lee, Vice President and Chief Research and Policy Officer at the Minority Media and Telecommunications Council, at Dr. Turner-Lee on Twitter.
Easy.
And Ted Smith, Chief of Civic Innovation at the Louisville Metro Government. Thank you, sir. So first, let's just start with some reactions going down the pike here. You just heard a whole lot come out of the senator here. Do you agree or disagree with the positions he's taken in terms of the importance of this? Is there something we're missing here in terms of the relevance of online access to the economy, to education across the board? Is there anything that we're missing in terms of context in these different communities? Are we down there? Move on down.
No, I absolutely agree. When we look at a city like Seattle, we are a high-tech hub. We're a city that's grown by 70,000 people over the last 5 years. Will grow by 120,000 more in the next 10. And 75% of those people are moving to our city for high-tech jobs. So there's this expectation that people want their government to be high-tech, that services are online, and yet we know 85% of our households have internet access at home, meaning 15% don't. That's about 90,000 households. So we're creating this gap where if those homes aren't getting access to services or aren't able to benefit from the homework divide, as the senator mentioned, we know we're creating permanent differences in our society. So it's a critical gap that we in Seattle have been studying. We're looking at how we can bring, Mayor Murray has introduced a policy to make sure that everyone in the city gets access to equal, affordable, and competitive broadband that approaches a gigabit standard, and we're working on several strategies to get there.
Okay.
Yeah, so my boss, Mayor Greg Fisher, is passionate about really being a lean-forward kind of city. And so if you think about Louisville, Kentucky, it's about 750,000 residents. So middle of the country, kind of mid-sized city, where if you don't actually grab this issue by the horns, I mean, there's a chance that just history happens to you, you know? So if you're not one of the biggest cities, you know, that often get a lot of the attention, have the tech hubs and all those sorts of things, if you're not intentional about it, really, we're not really sure how the private marketplace sorts these things out. We've certainly learned a lot from the airline industry about if you're not paying attention, you might discover the economic dependencies you have. And these are broad dependencies. It's education, it's economic development, it's public safety. I mean, this cuts across everything. So, yeah, I mean, a lot of what the senator has to say are the things that we need to be talking about as a country.
And for me, I don't come from a specific city. I represent an advocacy organization here in Washington, D.C. that's focusing on bringing access and closing the digital divide for underserved communities. And the senator is right on when it comes to digital equity. First-class digital citizenship is imperative for people to participate in this economy, in this social and civic discourse. everything that is important to each and every one of us in this room should be given and provided to every citizen, regardless of what they earn, where they live, and what their literacy level is. And so I think what he said in terms of bridging equity and innovation is right on point. I mean, I have some differences on how we get there. So when we get to that point, as people have heard me talk before, I think that there are ways that you can actually meet those goals where the priorities are more on the people versus, just looking at is a solution around just bringing community broadband. I mean, there's some challenges there as well, which we could talk about later.
Get right to that after this. How about
Yeah, I'll wait on that. But I think, in terms of his encompassing message around digital equity, as he mentioned, if we don't get this right, we're forcing a further stratification of a community of people who are going to fall further and further behind, worse than where they are now. So I think, he raised the eyebrows for many of us in this room to start paying attention to this.
I agree. Senator Booker's enthusiasm and passion for this is not overstated. I think that it's right on the mark, maybe not even stated strong enough. And I wish more of his colleagues in D.C., in Congress, would begin to take up this mantle. We see broadband access, broadband interactivity, the use of broadband across all of our population as being a basic service. And the basic service we knew before was what? Telephone, right? It's changed. And now it's internet access. Now, there's a lot of debate in terms of how big that is and how fast it is and so forth and so on. And that can go on through the discussion, but it's critical that we get people connected. It's a global competitive issue. It is a local competitive issue in terms of allowing people and to be connected and to be productive wherever they are. And it's even more important, I think, that it allows for a quality of life for people. It allows people to have access to a quality of life that we hope that they have. And as an elected official, that's what I really care about, is improving and increasing the quality of life of people. I think broadband is one of those paths that we need to make sure people have in their hands so that they can enjoy that.
So we're in an interesting place in many ways in this country with our public discourse. People are tweeting here, they're using Facebook, they're using private platforms for public speech, which gets us into some challenges right now. Our government's grappling with how to deal with that. Threats from abroad, free speech at home. If you look at the infrastructure around this country, a lot of what we're discussing here is private company infrastructure. That's been true for a long time. We won't get too far into net neutrality, but there has been a very contentious rulemaking process which has decided that we're going to regulate internet service providers, not the internet service providers, like utilities. Senator Booker brought up something interesting, though. He said that he believes in the free market, but there's been a market failure at the last mile. So, do you agree with that? And if so, what should we do about it? And I'll start this way and go down this way.
Wonderful. Well, last mile's always been a challenge in the telecommunication industry. Connecting that last, when we talk about last mile, for those who don't know, it's really getting the major highways, if you may, there is not as big of a challenge as getting it to everybody's doorstep. And so that last mile is getting it to the doorstep. It's very expensive. In some cases in the private industry, it does not fit their business model. And that's a fair statement when you take a look at them and you try to partner with private industry to recognize where it doesn't fit their business model. Their motive is profit. Our motive is public service, yet our goals are similar, and that's to get everybody connected. And so we have to work together and figure out how that works. That last mile is a challenge, but to a certain extent, technology is starting to catch up with some of that, where it doesn't always have to be in the ground, and some of it can be over the air. You have challenge with spectrum and how much spectrum is available and how fast you can go and so forth, but some of that is being eclipsed through the technology. Yet, it's still a challenge, and it's something we'll spend a lot of dollars on and a lot of brain power on trying to figure out how to get that signal to everybody's
So your answer is wireless, if I had to dig
Well, that's one of the answers. It's
All right.
not the whole answer.
Yeah, I mean, I would say with regards to the senator's conversation around making sure that every area is covered in some way by access, I mean, he's completely correct, right? We have to figure it out. You know, to Andy's point, wireless has become a gap stop in many communities where it's hard to pull infrastructure in. But I mean, I haven't been a person historically in my early years, I will not tell my age, trying to implement community wireless networks in community areas in Chicago or other areas when I was working with a group called One Economy. It's hard. I mean, it's hard work for cities to figure out how to deploy strategies that compete with competitive marketplace. And honestly, in some cases, it's not really a good use of tax dollars, particularly when the questions that we talked about earlier are so much more relevant. I mean, part of the problem that we have with this, folks, is that, you know, in the Pew study that just came out in July, 15% of Americans are just not using the internet. And it's not because it's not available, it's just because they have not figured it out. And that 15% tends to be poor, they tend to be rural, they tend to be seniors, they tend to be those folks who are becoming the other America. So we have to start weighing the options and the feasibility. Just like Andy said, how do we cover, or how do cities begin to being a place that not only requires initial equity investment, but also requires cities to keep up with the investments? I mean, I don't know about you, but I can barely keep up with the investments of all of the things that are happening in technology. To place that stress on cities, you know, although again, I'm a huge fan where there's not broadband available, that we need to find ways to empower, much like the senator said, cities to do that, but it's tough. You know, my internet in the airport and the experience and expectations I have of free Wi-Fi in the airport is different than what I expect to actually do telehealth and telemedicine in my community. And so I think weighing that feasibility and options is something that should be placed at the center as we make some of those decisions.
It is something that many travelers definitely experience disparities.
Right, right.
Fair to say.
So imagine if that's your kid trying to do homework. You know, I mean, you have to think about what that looks like when we try to actually build out that last mile.
Okay. Did you have any specific examples of how to bridge that last bit?
You know, I think, and I think the senator alluded to that, Clarence alluded to it earlier, I think public-private sector partnerships are one of the areas that we can look at it where there's the opportunity to convince city leaders, where there's, you know, more opportunities, I guess, you know, to figure out how to pay for it, how to do it correctly. I think Wi-Fi has become another stopgap for people in communities, and what we're seeing with regards to some of the public policies is becoming more interesting. I think the conversation that the senator picked up on spectrum policy, we need more spectrum in the pipeline for any of this stuff to work, and if we don't get it off of those government agencies that are parking it, you know, we might as well wrap up our presents for Christmas and leave the room, right? So, you know, just saying, right? So I think that there are ways that we can get at that infrastructure development in a way that is more productive and much more enhancing to cities. I mean, technology, again, and I've said this for the last 15, 20 years I've been in this, should be used for solving social problems. And that has to be the highlight of any decision that municipal agencies and governments make to ensure that it's done for the right purpose.
All right. Bring it on down to the Govy here.
So, the Govy.
I know, right?
So I really think the access conversation has changed, and I think we really all have to update the narrative. So when we look at our city, access to the internet in all of our communities is at 99%. I mean, it's just very high, and it's mostly been a function of mobile phone technology, right? So you know, we've sort of shifted the conversation in access to be effective access, you know, the cost-effective access to effective speed, right? And so we can start talking about broadband again, but when we look at it, it's really interesting. There's now kind of an inversion, at least in our community. If you look at social media use, only the most affluent, older white people in our community are not participating. You know, and we did this great map, you know, and it was a great challenge we went through, you know, because all the stereotypes and all the assumptions that people have were completely wrong. And so we're really trying to shift the dialogue to be really about that functional access. When somebody feels like they can do their homework with the internet that they have in their hand, on their tablet, whatever it may be. And so if you're a city, you just cannot avoid a conversation about fiber in the ground, about backhaul, you know, the last mile, who operates it, you know, who owns it, who you're making a phone call to when it doesn't work. I think it's premature to jump all the way over there. When I look in our community and I look in cities all over the country, we just don't have infrastructure, important infrastructure, across our communities. And so, we're very much focused on, being a fiber-friendly community. And I know a lot of people, sort of roll their eyes when you say fiber-friendly. But I got a good lesson when I started my job, which wasn't be a billionaire, thank goodness, because that's hard advice to start with for anybody. But it was, from Gig U, and they're just like, look, if you want this to be a city that can the telecommunications industry can work with, that anybody can work with modern infrastructure, you better start figuring out how to get out of the way and reduce those barriers, because we're never going to have any kind of infrastructure if we aren't a city that recognizes that we have to streamline the way this infrastructure is made available. So we are about backhaul, we're about fiber friendly, and we welcome conversations with everybody about how to solve for the last mile.
You'd then say that maybe you wouldn't agree so much because mobile is filling that gap? It's there for 99%
Well, you
of
see, the
residents?
irony of mobile is mobile has a tremendous dependency on backhaul. And so you have to have a fiber conversation no matter what, okay? And so a lot of people sort of said, well, if it's all going to come from the sky, then we don't have to worry about this conversation anymore. That's actually just not true at all in any way. And so if it's all coming from the sky, that means more mini cell towers and nano cell towers, and all of those things ultimately will need the speed of light somewhere behind them. I believe that, just because the power dynamics are so poor. So, we have to do this. We cannot avoid the conversation.
So out in Seattle, is everyone in Amazon's cloud yet? Are they providing access to everyone?
Oh, we can't leave Microsoft out of that mix either.
No, they do the software, not the access, right?
True.
Yeah.
But the last mile has been a challenge in Seattle. And when Mayor Murray took office, he realized something that you articulated quite nicely, which is we didn't have a government that was friendly towards putting in the latest telecommunications infrastructure. We had just had a failed partnership with a municipal broadband provider that turned out not to have the capital necessary to build out infrastructure in our city. And so when we looked at how we improved that last mile challenge, we came up with a three-pronged strategy. The first is reducing those regulatory barriers that we knew were preventing new fiber from coming into our city, and also preventing competition. So we worked to harmonize some of our permitting practices. In the city, we also own the electric utility with the poles and wires that go with it. And within a short period of time, we were able to attract a provider to the city who is now building out fiber to the premise citywide. And in the past 18 months, they've built out to about 160,000 homes is what they're telling us. And they're continuing to move forward. But it's not just about what others can bring to the table through regulatory change. We also focused on public-private partnerships. Like many cities, we own about 550 miles of dark fiber that ring our city. It's not enough for us to go out and be a municipal provider as is. But we identified where we were underutilizing that fiber and where we could lease it to companies who wanted to become an ISP. And our council gave us that authority, and we now have one company that is offering service to one of our neighborhoods, 100 megabit speed internet service to that community. We also were interested to see if we, as a city that owns and operates utilities, could be a municipal broadband provider. And we went through an effort this year to update a study we'd previously done. And what we learned is that while there's demand in the community and costs have come down, the cost of fiber construction is still too great for our municipality to bear. The cost would be somewhere between $480 million and $660 million. And due to Washington state laws and regulations, the way that we would finance that new utility would really put our general fund services at risk should it not be successful. Nicole, I think you said something really interesting, which is it's about the people. And one of the reasons we were studying municipal broadband is because we want to ensure that we as a city are in control of our destiny and we're not dependent on the telcos and cable companies of the world to make sure our internet access is equitable. So when we know that we've got virtually ubiquitous broadband, whether it's wired or wireline, or wireless, and 15% of our households don't take it, what we're very focused on right now is how do we close that gap? Is it an education issue, a cost issue? We're really working hard with our providers right now to get more low-income discount programs out into the community and spread that knowledge. We also launched a program last year in partnership with our public library and Google to buy MiFi devices, the wireless hotspots, and make those available from checkout from our libraries. The program's been a huge success, and we're going from about 150 hotspots to 700 next year, and we've got more grant applications in for more.
Yeah, and can I just follow up on that as
Please,
well?
you
I
can
mean,
definitely talk to each other. It's
Yeah,
good.
yeah, right. Not sure about that, right? Well, and I think that was the main point of my comment, right? When you talk about people and you put people in the middle, it becomes less of a conversation around we want to become the primary provider of that service, right? Which has a lot of risks that are involved with that. But I also caution cities, and this is not something Andy has not heard me say, or Clarence, be careful too about how you relinquish assets in the private sector, particularly those as cities that will pass over households. It's very imperative that cities begin to think about when you start taking over destiny, that the destiny is for everybody, and that you do not encourage digital redlining. We're seeing many cases where cities have come in because they've had this urgency to bring broadband to residents, but they've not serviced all the people that need it the most. And it's not because our city friends aren't trying to do the right thing. It's because I think we're all trying to reach this aspirational goal, which, like you said, is very difficult to get to. It requires multiple stakeholders at the table, and it requires us to really look at what issue we're trying to solve, and how does the availability of broadband do that. And again, I just go back. I think taxpayer money is best spent on digital literacy and other programs that begin to build the demand for broadband services.
You want to speak?
Yeah, so Nicole and I get a chance to hang together on
We do
these
all the
panels
time, so you see me
periodically.
act out.
Usually I'm moderating her and she's doing all the speaking. But, one of the challenges here, and you brought it up when you talked about the redlining issue, is that the environment has changed a little bit. It's changed a lot, actually. The model has changed, where the old model was very much a monopolistic model, right? The city's treated like a monopolistic model with franchises. The carriers or providers treat it as a monopolistic model. This is my area, and I'm the only person serving here. And in that model, there was that build-out requirement and all of the need to connect. And as different technologies have come into play and different regulations and so forth, it's become a competitive environment, not a monopolistic environment. Carriers are trying to figure out what that means to them. I don't think they know yet in a lot of respects. But their world has changed because new entries are coming into the marketplace. And we don't necessarily have the hook at a local level in a lot of states, and Kansas is one of them, to enforce franchise agreements upon these new participants in the market. In fact, they're not even characterizing themselves as a cable company or something of that nature. They are an internet company, which goes by a whole different set of rules and so forth. So this whole model is changing, and it's mixing things up in terms of how do we keep people from being passed over? How do we keep the redlining from happening? You've got all these participants. We want competition because it drives up service, it drives down costs, it gives people options. However, what do you do about the people that are left out? And I think that this is where this public-private partnership comes into play, because as a city councilman, I care that my people are served. I don't care how they're served. I just care that they are served. And I want to find a solution to those gaps and ways to make that happen. And we do that through partnerships with our great providers that are out there in many cases, who reach out to those people that are unserved and try to pass them. And this big model change is something that we have to be cognizant of. We're not done with the change, and people are starting to find their equilibrium with that change, and it matters.
Yeah, I just wrote about this challenge of companies calling themselves one thing, which means they can be regulated differently. Well, if anyone's familiar with Uber, right? Probably has come up here and there. They say they're a tech company, which means they're not subject to the Americans with Disabilities Act with their cars. And this is coming to a head around many cities right now in terms of whether there'll be enough wheelchair-accessible vehicles for those, 3.6 million Americans who are in wheelchairs. It's becoming a real issue as the taxi companies become, disrupted by Uber. This particular kind of challenge, I think, can come up in this space too. And it, I think, drives home the question of what's public. What's the public interest? There's a great question, and it's classic internet. It comes from Baron Bear, Lou C69, who's a member of the Ursine aristocracy on Twitter. He asks a good question, which happens a lot. What is the role of public places, public Wi-Fi, and public libraries and co-working centers? You talked about giving out MiFi devices. I know that the New York Public Library is doing that as well. You spoke a little bit about the cost of that. Is that where direction is going to go? Is cities are going to subsidize MiFi devices on wireless broadband networks? Is this how we're going to bridge the gap?
Well, I think it's part of kind of all of the above strategy. We have a critical need now. We have technology available to overcome that need. Is it sustainable for us to buy 90,000 MiFi devices for our 15% of households that don't have access? No. While we work on that divide, though, it's something we can do now, and we see huge demand for. One of the things that we realized in our municipal broadband study is while we can't find the $480 million we need to build out a citywide system we control, what we can do is better leverage assets like Wi-Fi. We do offer Wi-Fi in our community centers, some of them in all of our municipal buildings and other places. And in fact, it always surprises me. I'll walk from my office about 6 blocks down to where I catch the boat in the morning, and I'll pass by our, yes, you take the boat to work.
Boat?
Yeah. Highly recommend coming to try it. I'll pass by our fire station headquarters, and whether it's 7 a.m. or at 6 p.m. on the way out, you see this huge congregation of people just standing outside an old fire station. And granted, it's Pioneer Square, it's a fun neighborhood in Seattle, but you ask the question, why are those people there? And it's because there's a really strong Wi-Fi signal, and there's a great public park nearby. So one of the things we'll be focused on doing in 2016, thanks to Mayor Murray and Councilmember Bruce Harrell, who chairs our technology committee, is they tasked us with developing a Wi-Fi strategy for the city. So thinking about how do we create those places where if we can drive Wi-Fi closer at a mass scale to communities who have traditionally lower adoption or access, we can create better outcomes without causing someone to stay at school or drive across town to get that access. The other thing that, to that point around regulation and how do we think about what the public good is for these services, we know that the federal government has not given municipalities the right to regulate internet providers in the same way they have cable television providers through franchise agreements. The nice thing is that while we see cord nevers and cord cutters increasing, the triple play is still very important in how people buy broadband services. You need cable television with your internet from many households and potentially a phone line. So what we can influence is our cable code. And so in the city of Seattle, we updated our cable code in March of this year to do away with franchise districts. So the notion that if you want to offer a new competitive broadband service, you don't have to commit to building out X part of the city in 7 years. What we replaced that with, though, is a requirement that you must build out 30% of all new build to households that fall below the median income level in our city. So we try and address the redlining issue through some type of incentive that keeps pushing access farther and farther to those neighborhoods where we're concerned.
You want to speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, so we've definitely heard your public spaces, your community centers, your libraries. That's what the city has. That's your home base. You should work from that base. And the truth of the matter is, the MiFi stuff is genius, obviously. Is that I'm not going to send my 12-year-old to go do his homework to the park at 8 o'clock at night. I mean, it's just not going to do that. Community center's closed, library's closed.
How about McDonald's?
Yeah, how about McDonald's? Exactly. And it's a sad. It's a reality for a lot of people. And so, the truth is, the public spaces are a great place to start. But as soon as you move outside of the public spaces that we own and control, you actually meet people where they are, and you meet young people, you meet old people, you meet businesses, and it's a lot harder to leverage the public's platform in the neighborhood, in the commercial corridor, in the places where people are. And we have a pilot mesh network, wireless mesh network, in partnership with one of the largest telecommunications companies in the country that's just helping learn with us. And I think that's really what we have to do now is we need to have the internet available where the people are and not in limited hours and not in limited geography. And we have to figure out how to pool this. Maybe you start with the community center, the library, and start building bridges into neighborhoods and places where people live. This is really what we're trying to do now, because we do see the people hang out outside the community center because the signal's strong. And I think we're a better country than that. We can do much better than that, and people deserve it.
I'd like to pile on that if I could.
And you can pile on after.
So this is just interesting because, we have situations where, schools are rolling out iPads to, kindergartners now. You're not going to see a kindergartner take their iPad to go do their homework at a library or city hall or whatever. So to support your theory, it's got to be where they are. And the question is how do you get that signal there? And there are some great programs out there that some of our partners are putting in place. Comcast has the Internet Essentials program. Does a great job reaching out to a lot of low-income families and people to get that internet access. I wish more of the other carriers would do more. Some of them have some lower price ones, but when somebody's making the decision between putting bread on the table today or having their internet, what are they going to do? They're going to put bread on the table. We have to be cognizant of that fact and understand how to go past that. I think the Lifeline discussion right now and strengthening that into the broadband world will help this. I think that it'll help take care of some of the cost issues that are involved in getting it out there. But it occurs to me that a lot of this discussion has been dealing with access, which is primarily a technical issue, and not a lot of this discussion has been dealing with adoption, which is more about people, and it's more about it's more an adaptive issue. And there's a lot to figure out, and a lot to figure out why people don't adopt. And some of it is obvious that they don't feel like they can afford it, but some of it's not so obvious that they don't feel it's relevant. And that's our next big hurdle that we have to get over. We have to continue down the track of making sure access is there, but we have to hit that adoption side hard. Otherwise, we're still going to have 25% of the people in our country that don't have access to the internet.
Well, if we had another hour, we could talk about digital literacy, we could talk about the data divide, we could talk about data poverty, we could talk about education, we could talk about all those things. My brief here was to drive in on the technical stuff a little bit and get into the larger social regulatory issues, and you all have been game for that.
Can I just add on one quick
Oh, yeah.
thing? I mean, I want to just add on, just in terms of this conversation about Wi-Fi, I think we should also, as we talk about Wi-Fi, be very cognizant that people still conduct private transactions within the comfort of their home. One of the things that I think has been really fantastic about the FCC in recent years, Commissioner Rosenworcel has been particularly driving this, the homework gap, trying to move kids from the parking lot of McDonald's into a place that was much more safe and secure, like a library, E-rate extending, the ability to do unlicensed Wi-Fi within the purview of an educational institution. It's also critical that people have broadband at home. I mean, how many of us sit in the library and look up our diagnosis? Or try to figure out, and imagine people who are navigating through the social service delivery system of trying to qualify for benefits or find a caretaker. With a 30-minute limit, oftentimes in the library, it becomes very hard. And our libraries are doing the best that they can to actually accommodate demand. But I think we need to also keep talking about how to improve residential broadband access. We have, as Andy said, we are right now in the middle of looking at the Lifeline program, which would be one of those areas to capture populations where cost is restrictive. We do have companies that have invested in, and many more, Comcast and others, that are beginning to look at low-income broadband adoption programs that are targeted to residential broadband. But I think, I always find now Wi-Fi is incredibly fascinating. I can do a lot of stuff like many of you where I am standing on that corner at that moment. But when I put myself in the shoes of a single parent, or I put myself into the shoes of a kid that's trying to finish a science project like my son is now, right? Having the ability to do those things from the comfort of your home still matters. And so I think it's just, again, one of those things we have to keep talking about. It feels like oftentimes it's sort of pushed to the side. And I don't know how far we can go into Lifeline, but just a plug, we need to have Lifeline have broadband included. It is the 21st century communications tool. So if that conversation is not happening, we're again disservicing those populations with regards to that. And better yet, when we talk about adoption and demand, we need to coordinate it with programs where people with needs lie, like the SNAP program or other public assistance programs, where we can match the 24% uptake of Lifeline with the 86% of those in poverty and figure out how to provide them a real gateway to self-sufficiency. So I don't know how much you're going to talk about that, but I wanted to put it out as a plug, because you have to have a full conversation.
We're bumping up against it. But I do want to give you all an opportunity to ask questions. So someone right back there.
Hi, good morning. My name is September Hargrove, and I'm the White House Fellow at the National Economic Council. I'm actually working on Connect Home and looking at some of the reforms to Lifeline. And I'm really curious, we've been having some dialogues around the issue of credit and with these low-income programs from the private sector, how if you have extending bills or credit issues, like from a local level, as you're looking at your public-private partnerships, have you all discussed kind of how to address that barrier as well?
Anyone want to hop on that?
Well, I mean, I could just say, I think, to your point, I think we've come a long way where some of those hiccups that you're talking about in terms of credit viability of low-income consumers has been looked at by companies. I know at MMTC, we've voiced concern that those should be issues that companies take into consideration. I would like to say that it's being responded to. I mean, it's tough with the private sector to take on somebody who has debt that's carried over for a few years, but I think they're beginning to see ways that they can actually integrate that. I would say when it comes to Lifeline, because it is a universally available program, that should not exist. And any attempt to put credit restrictions on Lifeline is almost a way to sort of backdoor people out versus bringing them in. So I would think that that would provide an option for those populations that may not necessarily get into these other programs. Lifeline should be the universal, ubiquitous tool for getting more people onto broadband.
You know, first off, thank you for all the work on the Connect Home program. Seattle was proud to be in one of the first cohort cities, and it's been great to have the resources from HUD around the public-private partnerships that exist to drive broadband further into communities. Specific to your point around the barriers that exist to low-income discount programs, like the Comcast Internet Essentials program and Internet Basics from CenturyLink, obviously we're not big fans. We see that being a real struggle for people who want to take advantage of these programs, and we haven't solved that challenge yet. One thing that we're realizing is, we as a city can play a greater role in helping align people with discount programs that may be available. We have a community technology team of 4 people on it who are driving digital equity strategies in our city. We have an Office of Cable Communications where people call up to ask questions about broadband and cable. And so we today are able to answer questions about, here's the types of programs for discounts you may be eligible for. We could be doing more and are going to be looking at how it is we deal with the barriers like the 90-day disconnect rule for current customers before they get a discount, the debt rule, and see how we can work with our providers to overcome those.
Right there.
Hi, thank you. Laura Clark at the American Library Association. I've been really glad to hear the library part of the story, but I know that there was a beginning of a conversation about adoption, and our 17,000 public libraries, access and adoption, are married to each other, and we, as the training home for a lot of this stuff, I would love it if each of you would talk a little bit about the adoption piece and what kind of partnerships you're seeing there, because I think there's a lot of room for improvement on the adoption, whether that's coding, the meaningful use of the technology, and how do we really ramp that up.
I'll go ahead and take it. I think the situation in our libraries mirrors the sort of the larger economy, which is when there aren't things to do with the internet that are useful, then don't expect useful use of the internet, right? So when I look at, for example, government services, Mayor Fisher's made a huge push on let's make sure that when you're at the library with your 30 minutes or whatever it is, that you're actually able to do something meaningful that improves your situation. And so, I think these things are absolutely tied. I think adoption, not to sound arrogant about it, but sort of takes care of itself if there's actual value in the equation. I'm not a big fan of teaching people how to use web browsers. It's not, that's not the game, right? So at the end of the day, it's a push for us to say, well, whether it's signing up for health insurance or whatever it may be, those are high value things. We have an obligation, certainly in the public sector, to make sure that your government is more available to you so that when you do have those snippets in places, that you're able to do something that really takes some burden off of you. You don't need to go to a government office or whatever it might be. So we're really working hard to try to tie the library to other things, right? That is the use of the internet. And, it's also true in workforce stuff. So, learning how to code, we have a big program called Code Louisville that is, it's online courseware, curated with mentors. We've got 760 people going through it right now. It's a high-scale, good use of the internet, good use of the services that we make available to the community as part of their tax dollars. So I think it's really a substance issue at some level.
Another question? Right there.
Hi, Phil Goldstein from FedTech Magazine. You guys talked about wireless adoption sort of being a stopgap. The U.S. has led the way on LTE rollout. We're speeding towards 5G with promises of speeds of up to a gigabit per second potentially. But Mr. Smith mentioned backhaul and how backhaul really is what underpins wireless broadband. So as we move toward that future where speeds are going to be continually increasing, how should state and local governments think about how backhaul access is going to expand? Because when these networks get deployed, oftentimes the decision about where to put backhaul and how much backhaul is left up to the carriers who are deploying the commercial networks.
Yeah, well, backhaul is a big challenge, and we're seeing that literally every day as we look at innovation and as providers are densifying. That's one of the words that's now becoming more and more popular, and people will be talking about that more. They're densifying their footprint. They're trying to provide higher speeds and better access, and they're doing it through a lot of combination of microcells and mini cells and every other kind of cell that you could imagine to put a name to. And the reality is that to each one of those, you have to have backhaul. You have to have the ability to hook into the internet, essentially. That's what we mean by
Does everybody
backhaul.
in this room know what backhaul is? Raise your hand if you know what that is. That's pretty impressive. All right.
Yeah, it really is. And, but it's so it's a huge challenge.
What
Guys,
is
right
it?
there. Half of the room
You
didn't
want to
raise
get
their
this? It's the connection between the telecommunications backbone and then whichever cell is distributing the signal at the end.
Right.
So it's the in-between part.
So there are lots of ways to create backhaul, and one of them is to take fiber to each pole that there's a device on. The problem is that there are also boxes on the ground when that happens. There's another way to, now that they're playing around on a wireless side, to at least get the mini cells taken care of. Problem is spectrum, and it's typically unlicensed spectrum, and it's Wi-Fi, part of the Wi-Fi band, and so that's a challenge, and it's expensive as well, what they're dealing with, or to use some of the legacy infrastructure like copper and try to drive it that way. But of course, we're retiring copper in this country by the year 2020, and that may or may not be available to us in the future. And so there are lots of challenges in terms of how do you get this backhaul to these places? How do you service this? It's going to create stresses somewhere else, and we've got to deal with those, and there are smarter people than I to deal with those, I think.
Okay. Take one more, and then I'm going to call it. Take the gentleman in front here.
Yes. Guess being by the mic has its advantages. Good morning. Good morning. My name is Bobby Jones, and I'm from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And my question to you is, as part of the 2016 Farm Bill, there was funds allocated for broadband support for one of our agencies, rural development. And my question to you is, are you guys working with rural development, and if so, how is that relationship going when it comes to public-private relationships?
We are not, and it's not because we don't want to. It's because my understanding is that the city of Seattle at our size would not be eligible for the grants coming out of the Rural Development Services. And while we just saw statistics that Adi presented that says Seattle is doing comparatively well in broadband adoption, I do think it's a little bit of a missed opportunity. Our urban areas are growing rapidly in this country, and they drive. The former economic development person can keep me accurate. 83% of our economic output in this country is from urban areas. There we go. And yet we don't control our own destiny when it comes to broadband access. When we decided not to pursue a municipal broadband system in Seattle this year, it wasn't because we didn't want it. It's not because we didn't see the need or the goodness that would come from owning a connection to every home in our city. It was the fact that we don't have $480 million, and we didn't see a path to finance that without incurring significant risk to our general fund. So I do hope in the future there will be federal opportunities that recognize that the internet is the critical utility of the 21st century, the value that can come from having a tightly integrated society that's connected to a network for the greater good, and that hopefully we'll be able to reconsider our muni broadband decision in the future.
Oh, go ahead.
I would just pile in on, there's a great need right now for harmonization of these federal programs. And so, unfortunately, I didn't know anything about that. We'll go study it. Certainly know about the work that HUD's doing. There are any number of HHSs doing some things. And so it turns out, as a community, we really will benefit from the synergy of these programs. So we have the largest public-private broadband partnership in the country in the state of Kentucky. So it's called the Kentucky Wired Project. It's running fiber across the entire length of our state. It's a middle mile project. It's not last mile. But we're embracing it as a city because we recognize that this is going to be another piece for solving the equation. So the more infrastructure that's put in place, regardless of the program that funds it, we're all going to win. And so, my hope is that we can have more of an abundance mentality about all the various efforts and how they really all are connected one to the other. So I benefit when that middle mile project rolls across our state. It will definitely make my situation in Louisville better. And I can only imagine it will be better for people in rural Kentucky to know that they're connected in a meaningful way to our urban center. So, let's go call for harmony.
Right. I want to echo that. I think, having been in this area for quite some time, what I have seen over the years and the Broadband Opportunity Council that came out of the White House is thinking around how do you create a comprehensive blueprint was, also an echoing of the National Broadband Plan that Blair Levin actually put out through the FCC. But what I keep seeing is sort of like, let's figure out what parts of the puzzle might work. And perhaps if we do this right, we'll get to the type of comprehensive broadband policy that moves the needle. RUS, for our communities, rural communities that are African American and poor could greatly benefit from infrastructure dollars into those communities. But I can tell you, not a lot of folks are qualified or eligible to participate, and it's not known. And the more that we have this conversation about comprehensive broadband policy that looks at, I think, again, BOC, the Broadband Opportunity Council did a great job with the report. But I can tell you, it's sort of like when I sit down with my kids and I buy one of those 500-piece puzzles, the first thing that they do is they put all the pieces on the table. And we sit there for a little bit of time trying to figure out what the picture looks like to put the pieces together. I think that's sort of what we did with broadband policy today. We put all the pieces on the table in hopes that we'll get to the illustration of what comprehensive policy looks like. Perhaps we might want to look at, based on this conversation, based on what the senator said, where is our ultimate goal of where we want to go with national broadband policy? Where do people fit into? Where do the communities fit into? How does it look in terms of taking the tensions that Andy talked about? And we actually might get someplace where those of us that have been in this business for 20 years might actually see a community where it is harmonized to create the economic benefits to the other America that's not benefiting from broadband. So I put it out there because I constantly tell people it's like that pie, all the pieces have been taken out of the pie, but you can't put it back together.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah. So the rural money, the RUS money, probably not broad enough, didn't reach far enough, still is going on. There is investment in infrastructure. It's primarily middle mile, as Nicole said. There are, one of the hats that I wear is I serve on the Intergovernmental Advisory for the FCC, and I represent cities, but we have people that represent tribal governments there as well, and it's the epitome of the rural question that you're asking, and actually getting that access and getting the carrier's attention in a lot of cases, or the private sector's attention, or what else can they do to get more than just dial-up. The reality is that there are a lot of people that choose to live and work and thrive in their rural communities, and part of the broadband promise, I think, is that we have the ability to live and work wherever we want to work, assuming we're connected, and thrive in those areas. And why does everybody have to move to a city? Why can't they stay on their family farm that they've had for 5 generations and really make a go of it? Yet the internet is real to those people, and it matters to those people. And when they're doing cattle auctions, and they're live cattle auctions, and they can't keep up with the other people that are online because they don't have the kind of connection, that's an economic issue for them, and it may drive them out of business.
Right.
We've got to also continue to look at the rural areas and figure out how to get the broadband out there, and we have to do it in a lot of different ways. We've got to make sure that those RUS monies are extended and utilized correctly. We've got to engage the private sector that's out there already. Lots of them are more regional providers as opposed to national providers, and find ways to engage them and get those pipes out there.
And keep the tribal nations, the First Nations.
Absolutely. We could spend probably another hour on the Russ money issue.
Right after.
You're right.
Well, and I would encourage anyone who hasn't seen it to read Tony Rahm and Politico back from July. If you're not aware, the stimulus back in 2009 allocated $3 billion. $3 billion to be spent on this area. His investigation in July found that less than half of the projects had drawn that down. 40 of them never even got started. I'm not sure what happened in September, but there's a pretty good chance that close to $300 million simply would never be allocated at all because they simply didn't follow through. If you want any leads to go follow up, if the journalists in the audience, go track that down. What happened to all the money that was supposed to be spent getting rural Americans online? 7 million people were supposed to get online. Agency declined to tell Politico, but the estimates are in the hundreds of thousands. There is a gap between the rhetoric and between what actually happens on the ground. There is a gap between the money that's supposed to be spent and the outcomes for Americans. I hope we got to some of the solutions that we need to be discussing here. One thing I would push a little harder on is whether mobile is enough when we know there are bandwidth caps that get stuck on there, right? Is that sufficient to bridge the gap if you cannot get to full access? My new MiFi from my corporate overlord at Verizon is a 2 gigabyte cap on it. That's a movie or two. Not watching movies on it, or watching other things, right? But the reality is that for someone who's relying on it as their primary access point, that could be a big challenge, particularly if they're trying to, say, watch some of the video education that we're talking about with flipping the classroom. How are you supposed to use Khan Academy if you've got a bandwidth cap on your mobile connection? I don't know the answer to that.
There's other solutions. I have a paper coming out.
Yeah, well, bring it to it. What's great about opportunities like this and forums like this is we get to drive down towards solutions, but we also should be articulating how challenging some of the problems are. To be getting into some of the places where incumbents are defending their ground using local regulations, using local codes, using state legislatures, something I would have asked the senator about. The extent to which we are allowing public interest advocacy to be pushed to the side by immense amounts of lobbying by those who have the most amount of money. That's something others of my colleagues have delved into. What's the really most valuable thing to me here is that we're talking with cities who really are working towards trying to connect people to solutions and comparing and contrasting how the approaches are working. I'm really glad I got to come here again to talk about this with you all. I hope the people online have enjoyed it. Thank you for the questions on Twitter. This should be archived if you want to circle back. Definitely make sure to download that paper. Take a look. Thank you for the research. And please come back again. Thank you.